Can you meet your B12 needs on a plant-based diet, on a vegan diet, without B12 supplementation? Are there natural plant foods that provide B12? No, no plant foods contain meaningful amounts of B12, is what I would normally say. But while researching, I found supposedly reputable sites saying, yes, there are natural vegan sources of B12. And yes, they can meet daily B12 needs. For instance, this site, Plant-Based Dietitians, they say if you don't want to supplement, you don't have to. While you do need supplements to raise your levels if you are deficient, including shiitake mushrooms and certain seaweeds in your diet can maintain adequate B12 levels. WebMD says basically the same thing. Mushrooms and certain seaweeds are sources of B12. These vegetarian sources of vitamin B12 are an excellent way for vegans to include the nutrient in their diets. So maybe I've been wrong. I mean, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a dietitian. These people are, and they say, yes, vegans can meet B12 needs without taking a B12 supplement. Maybe some new evidence has come to light that I'm not aware of. Before we look at the evidence for various plant foods, how many am I talking about? 8, I think. Before we look at those foods, it's important to know what we're actually looking for. I agree 100% with registered dietitian Jack Norris, veganhealth.org, that it's not enough for a study or even several studies to find a food contains B12. Just because a food contains B12 doesn't mean it's actually a good source of B12. Doesn't mean that food will actually improve or maintain B12 levels. So what we really want to see are studies on people getting B12 from whatever food is being studied, and only that food, right? So they're not eating animal products, they're not getting any supplementation, and then seeing if their levels change from baseline, from the beginning of the study. Active versus inactive B12. Inactive or pseudo B12 cannot be used by the human body, so it is essentially not B12. If a food has B12 but a large percentage of that is inactive, it is not a B12 source. So yeah, it's a lot to consider. And actually, one more thing, I'm not looking at foods that are fortified, because that to me is very similar to supplementation, right? So I'm not looking at nutritional yeast or breakfast cereals or plant milks, nothing with B12 added to it. I'm only looking at plant foods that are supposedly natural sources of B12. Okay, let's finally start with mushrooms, specifically shiitake mushrooms. You need to get about 50 grams of dried shiitake mushrooms to fulfill your daily vitamin B12 needs. This is from that WebMD article. 50 grams is about 1.8 ounces, 150 calories. So yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of mushroom. Doesn't seem very practical, certainly not as an everyday thing. But the problem with shiitake mushrooms extends beyond impracticality. The evidence for this statement is concerning. It comes from one single study published in 2014, and while they did find active B12 in shiitake mushrooms, the amount varied per sample from 1.28 micrograms per 100 grams of dry weight to 12, almost 13 micrograms. And the mushrooms for this study were purchased and presumably grown in Japan. It's possible ones grown in the US, in China, wherever else, have different amounts. You can't just assume that these study results apply to all shiitake mushrooms. Most importantly, I could not find a single human trial. No study finding a correlation between shiitake mushrooms and improved B12 status. It simply has not been tested. Other mushrooms appear to have some B12 as well, much less than shiitake, which is why people focus on shiitake. And we do run into the same issues. Number one, the amount varies within the same species. And even at the higher end, like assuming the mushroom contains the higher amount found, it's still a lot of mushrooms, even more than shiitake, to meet your daily needs. And 3, no studies have been conducted on people showing that these mushrooms improve or maintain adequate B12 levels. So even if you could eat 50 grams of dried shiitake mushrooms a day, using that to get your B12, it's just a huge gamble. Nori, or purple laver? I think when I looked it up, it was laver. Anyway, eating 4 grams of dried nori would meet your daily B12 needs, again from WebMD. That's about one of these little snack packs, which is much more reasonable than the 50 grams of shiitake mushrooms. My kids actually love these. I can't even stand the smell of them. But hey, it's a really healthy food. It's a great source of iodine as well. It would be really cool if they also provided B12. Several studies have found meaningful amounts of active B12 in nori, but again, that's just not enough. For one thing, again, levels vary. You can see that on the labels of these two different snack pack brands. This one says one 4-gram pack meets 30% of the daily value, that's 2.4 micrograms per day. This one says 5 grams meets 130%. No idea where they're getting this from, if it's even accurate. Again, big problem. Not that it really matters because, again, we want human trials, which in this case, we actually have. There are 3 in vivo studies looking at nori and B12. Unfortunately, one of them is on rats, so doesn't tell us much. This one also doesn't tell us much. They found normal B12 levels in 6 vegan kids who were eating 2 to 4 grams of nori per day. It's only 6 kids, and it's not an intervention where they were checking their B12 at the beginning, at baseline, and then giving them nori and seeing if their levels change. They're just kind of assuming that the nori is why they have adequate B12 levels. But the truth is, we really have no idea why their B12 levels were okay. Maybe it's the nori, maybe not. This last one, published just last year, 2024, is an intervention, so that's good. We have 30 vegetarians. They were randomized to one of 3 groups: the control group, which is no nori, the low nori group, which is 5 grams of nori per day, and the high, which is 8 grams of nori per day. The trial lasted 4 weeks, and they checked various B12 markers, including MMA. While the control saw virtually no changes, the low and high nori groups saw statistically significant improvements in most markers. Some caveats, of course. Number 1, 80% of the vegetarians were vegetarian, not vegan. They were eating dairy and eggs, so they were already getting some B12. However, they were not getting very much, so it seems like they weren't eating very much animal products. And B12 intake from non-nori sources, according to these participants, barely changed from baseline. I'd say it's entirely possible that the nori is, in fact, improving B12 status, unless the nori is improving absorption of B12 from the animal sources. I guess that's possible too. It's only 30 people and it's only 4 weeks. Again, it's pretty cool they saw significant changes in those 4 weeks. 4 weeks is a pretty short amount of time. If you're B12 deficient, you go to the doctor, you're probably going to get like 1,000 microgram per day supplement, way more than the low or even high nori group is getting. And you still wouldn't expect to see improvements in B12 status for weeks or even months. I would love to see this study done on vegans, really several studies on vegans who are not supplementing, right? They stop supplementing for B12, they're only eating nori, and ideally a longer time frame. Jack Norris says, while I'm surprised at how impressive these results are for many of the participants, there are enough inconsistencies that I can't yet feel comfortable recommending nori as a reliable source of B12 for vegans. More research is needed before it can be recommended as a sole reliable source of B12. Which is what the study authors conclude as well. More research is needed. Not nori is fine as long as you aren't deficient. No, there's no evidence nori can maintain adequate B12 levels long term. Dulse, another seaweed, and like nori, multiple studies have found dulse contains active B12. Also like nori, human trials are lacking. In fact, I could not find a single one. Also, really important to note, dulse has insane amounts of iodine, like 100, maybe as much as 200 micrograms per gram. That's less than a teaspoon of dulse flakes. The 20 plus grams of dulse you would have to consume to maybe meet your B12 needs would certainly land you well above the tolerable upper limit for iodine, which is 1.1 milligrams, I think. And this is not something you want to do. Excessive iodine intake can lead to hypothyroidism. It can cause thyroiditis, inflammation of the thyroid. It can even cause thyroid cancer. So unlike pretty much all of these other foods, trying to rely on dulse to meet your B12 needs, pretty dangerous. Sea moss, or Irish moss. I think there was another name too. Anyway, I just received a comment about this one. I had not heard about it before, but a vegan claimed sea moss is a good source of B12 when they were asked if they supplement for B12, implying that no, they don't. They just eat Irish moss. And when you Google sea moss B12, the first result says, yes, sea moss is an excellent source of lots of vitamins, including B12. In fact, a lot of sources claim sea moss, Irish moss, is a good source of B12. It's a B12 gold mine, according to a website that sells sea moss. Shocking. Interestingly, 2 other sites that sell sea moss say the opposite. While sea moss contains a variety of vitamins and minerals, it does not naturally contain significant amounts of vitamin B12. Individuals relying on a plant-based diet should consider alternative sources or supplements to ensure adequate B12 intake. Who's right? I mean, you can probably guess. For one thing, this B12 gold mine website, the study they're referencing was not looking at Irish moss, it was looking at Chlorella. Anything to sell your product, I guess. Unfortunately, there are no human trials on sea moss and B12, which is not surprising given it doesn't appear to contain significant amounts of B12. So why would anyone do human trials? This study on various seaweeds sampled from the UK and Ireland found an average of about 2.5 micrograms of B12 in 100 grams dry weight, which is a whole lot of seaweed. It means 5 grams would contain only 0.125 micrograms. 19 times lower than the RDA. So yeah, you'd have to eat almost the full 100 grams every single day. This one on seaweeds in green smoothies. Yummy. They found only 0.4 micrograms per kilogram. A kilogram is 2.2 pounds of fresh weight, not dried. Assuming a 10-to-1 wet to dry ratio, we get 100 grams. So 100 grams dried Irish moss would contain only 0.4 micrograms of B12. So you would need 6 times that. So 600 grams of dried Irish moss to meet B12 requirements. And it would taste very bad, apparently. So yeah, it's a win-win. I think it's safe to say Irish moss is not a source of B12. Again, we don't even need human trials here. It just doesn't contain B12 in meaningful amounts. Chlorella. I mentioned chlorella just a few minutes ago, and yeah, it does appear to have meaningful amounts of B12 like Nori and Dulse, and there's not 1 but 2 human interventions. The first one is a 2-week RCT on 80 participants, and there are 4 groups, so it's kind of a lot, but we have 2 intervention and 2 control groups. Intervention 1 got a diet, so like a diet plan, plus a smoothie with 15 grams of chlorella. Intervention 2 got diet as well and a smoothie, but this smoothie had 15 grams of microchloropsis. It's a different algae. Control 1 got nothing, and control 2 got the diet, no smoothie. So the one we're interested in is intervention 1, right? The chlorella group. They're the only ones that got chlorella. While they did see an increase in serum B12 in just those 2 weeks, they found no statistically significant difference between groups. And even if they did, it's one small study on non-vegans. Actually, vegetarians and vegans were excluded. Everyone was omnivorous, and yeah, it's just not nearly enough to change B12 recommendations to include chlorella as a good source. The other study is on vegans and vegetarians, 17 of them with a B12 deficiency. They were given 9 grams of a whole food chlorella supplement every single day for 60 days. MMA was tested, and it did indeed drop, which again is good, lower is better. Average drop at the end of the 2 months was 34%, with 15 of 17 people showing at least a 10% drop in MMA. 9 of 15 people with elevated MMA levels at baseline saw their levels drop to normal by the end of the study. That is quite impressive, but again, caveats. 1, there's no control here. It was just intervention. All 17 people were put in the intervention group. 2, they included vegetarians, not just vegans. Who knows how many animal products they were eating, if they increased the amount of animal products they were eating during the trial. 3, it's only 17 people. And 4, this is possibly the most important, they had to consume 45 tablets per day. Maybe that's overkill. Maybe they only needed 30 tablets. We just don't know. The significant drawback of relying on chlorella for B12 is that chlorella doesn't produce the B12. Rather, it absorbs it from its environment, likely due to bacterial contamination. This makes it especially important either that A, batches from a wide variety of sources are consistently shown to contain B12, or B, that a particular company is able to understand and replicate how their chlorella absorbs B12 from the environment. The same is true for a lot of these foods, like mushrooms, shiitake mushrooms. The B12 is not in the mushrooms itself. It's from the logs that they grow on. As Jack Norris says, this makes testing lots of different sources even more important. Just as an example, this study looked at nutrients in 15 different algae powders, including chlorella, and they found all of them contained little B12, much less than what the packaging claimed. So yeah, chlorella might be an adequate source of B12, but there is just not nearly enough evidence to change recommendations. I would not take chlorella to try and meet B12 needs. Spirulina, I don't see this one much anymore, but it used to be the big natural plant source of B12. Like every vegan What I Ate Today had a spirulina supplement, and they would say, yeah, this is how I get my B12. It was so common. And yes, there were studies showing spirulina contained B12, but again, we don't care about B12, we care about active B12. And spirulina is not a good source of active B12. Most of the spirulina supplements tested in this study contain 72.6 to 97.9% inactive B12. So spirulina is basically all inactive B12. Products with high contents of pseudocobalamin should not be advertised to consumers as a labeled source of vitamin B12. Yeah, spirulina, not a source of B12. We don't need human trials. It's just not. Duckweed, unlike spirulina, this is a newer one, a newer potential natural source of B12. Some vegans are really excited about it. It's not a seaweed or an algae. It's actually an aquatic plant. It's also called water lentils, I think, and mankai. Anyway, we have this study published back in 2019. 3 test meals were given to 36 men. One of these test meals contained duckweed. Apparently, the duckweed provided 2.81 micrograms of B12. They suspect it's bacteria, not bacteria on the duckweed, but actually inside it. Unfortunately, they didn't determine if the B12 was active or inactive, and the serum B12 levels were checked basically right after they ate. So they did find elevated levels after the duckweed meal, but it was only 3 hours after they ate. So it's not clear what that's supposed to tell us. The other study that got people really excited was this one in 2020. 294 participants were randomized to one of 3 groups for 18 months. You had the healthy dietary guidelines group, so they were just given guidelines to eat healthy, right? Calorie restricted Mediterranean group, so they were told how to eat a Mediterranean diet and also told to restrict calories. And then the third group was the calorie restricted Mediterranean plus avoiding red meat and processed foods, plus replacing dinner with 3 to 4 cups of 100 grams frozen duckweed. That's absolute hell. I don't get dinner. I get what? Yes, the duckweed group did see an increase in serum B12, but there's just so much going on here. It's not clear what we're supposed to learn from this. Again, the avoiding red meat, Mediterranean, calorie restriction. Most importantly, these were not vegans, and the duckweed group actually increased the amount of egg, milk, and fish they were eating during the intervention. It's entirely possible all of the increase in serum B12 came from animal products, not duckweed. So unfortunately, we have another study that just doesn't tell us anything. Finally, we have this study published last year, 2024. Unfortunately, it's not a human trial. What they did do is they analyzed 15 different types of duckweed, and they found B12 in all of them. Now, this is per 100 grams dry weight, so yeah, it's not a whole lot of B12. You can see they did 2 different measurements here, and the measurements vary quite a lot. So yeah, clearly this is not a super sensitive way to test for B12. Anyway, they estimate 0.8 micrograms in 150 grams of fresh duckweed. This is about 30% of the RDA, which is not terrible if this is one of your sources of B12, right? Like, I'm trying to think. I think when I make like a romaine salad, it's probably like 100 grams of romaine, something like that. So I could see someone making, I mean, I don't know what duckweed tastes like. It's probably terrible, but maybe not. Maybe it's good. I could see someone making a 150 gram duckweed salad and getting 30% of their B12 needs met for the day. Some other cool stuff from the study too, they showed that most of the B12 is active and that the source of the B12 is very likely bacteria, like people thought, inside of the duckweed. They sterilized several of the species and found that B12 dramatically reduced. It's all very cool, but at the end of the day, we have 3 studies finding decent amounts of B12 in duckweed and 1 human trial that tells us nothing. More research needs to be conducted and subjected to peer review before duckweed can be considered a reliable source of B12 for humans. Let's move away from mushrooms and seaweeds, foods that I hate, and turn to another food that I hate, tempeh. Okay, that's not true. I hate most, if not all, store-bought tempeh, but I do really like homemade tempeh, and there's a restaurant here that makes their own, and it's very good. So I'm very picky about my tempeh. Anyway, most of the studies on tempeh find little to no B12. It's only these studies enhancing tempeh with certain bacteria that find meaningful amounts. And usually they're not using soy tempeh, they're using lupin tempeh. Is that how you say that? Lupine? Lupin? It's a different kind of legume. Most importantly, human trials. There are none. No interventions giving people tempeh and checking their B12 status. There are a few other supposed vegan sources of B12, like fermented black tea, but they all have the same underwhelming evidence, right? Maybe a couple studies showing that they have B12, maybe active B12, and no human trials. To be clear, I would love for there to be a natural whole food source of B12 for people, just for people to have more options, right? I'm totally fine with my B12 supplement, but I know for a lot of people, they would really like that. But as of today, no unfortified vegan foods qualify as a B12 source. No seaweeds, no mushrooms, no duckweed, no fermented foods. It cannot be emphasized enough that until a particular food obtained from multiple regions consistently improves vitamin B12 status by lowering MMA levels in humans, it should not be relied upon as a source of vitamin B12. No plant food has come close to this standard, to this amount of testing. So for now, and likely the foreseeable future, the easiest, safest, cheapest, and least cruel way to meet B12 needs is via supplementation. If you ever hear someone claiming there's a new vegan plant food that's a source of B12, I highly recommend going to veganhealth.org, specifically Jack Norris's B12 page, specifically the section on B12 in plant foods. More likely than not, he will have addressed it, and yeah, the evidence will be underwhelming. And if you're still determined to eat shiitake or nori or whatever for B12, please get your levels checked regularly. And if you're eating a lot of seaweed, please monitor your iodine as well. Getting a goiter because you didn't want to take a B12 supplement, that would just be the saddest thing. It'd be very funny, to be clear, like I would have to make fun of you, I'm sorry. So unsurprisingly, there's no change here. I don't know why these sites claim there are natural sources of B12. People just really want that to be true. If you have the time, please do consider contacting WebMD. I doubt you'll get a response, but you might get a response from plant-based dietitians. Be nice, of course, but send them the Jack Norris link and mention something about hey, probably not enough evidence to recommend these foods as sources of B12. It's potentially very risky what they're recommending. That said, if I liked any of these foods, specifically nori, if I could actually eat 4 or 5 grams of nori a day, oh man. It would be kind of cool to do a little experiment, not science, right? Just a personal little experiment, right? To stop taking any B12 supplement, no plant milks, nothing, and just eat nori every day. Have your B12 levels monitored at the beginning, and then after, 3 months or something, and see if there's a change. That would be kind of fun. I'm not recommending anyone do this, to be clear, but yeah, I don't know. If I could do that, I might. And then would tell no one, because I wouldn't want people to assume that's science and that, oh, nori's a source. I'm going to start eating nori. Yeah, there would be no point to that, really. Anyway, I would love to know your thoughts. If there are any foods that I missed or that Jack Norris missed. Maybe there are some that aren't on his list. I think he didn't have Irish moss mentioned, so there might be others that I'm just unaware of. Several animals, including other primates seem to get a decent amount of B12 from poop. Again, bacteria. Don't do that. That might be the only natural, reliable way for humans to get B12 without animal products. I hope not. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really do hope you enjoyed it. Please do like and subscribe and hit the bell, all that kind of stuff. And of course, thank you so much to people who monetarily support the channel, everyone here on YouTube, my members, and my patrons at patreon.com/unnaturalvegan. I got a lot of new patrons and members, I think on my last video where I was more explicit, I guess, about how important Patreon is for the channel, right? Like, I don't get a huge number of views. I don't do sponsorships. So yeah, it was cool to see. I'm assuming that's why, maybe not, but I'm assuming that's why I got more people joining, and supporting the channel with money. Yeah, really cool. I just don't ever want to be put in a position where I feel like I can't say something about a particular product or food or something because I've done a sponsorship. That just no. I would rather make zero money than be in that sort of situation. Plus, it's obnoxious. As someone who watches a fair amount of YouTube, it's just very annoying getting sponsorships. Even if you have YouTube Premium, you're still gonna get those. They do have the jump ahead thing now, which works on a lot of videos. That is pretty cool. Totally forgot to mention that I do exclusive videos for tier 2 members and patrons. I do a vlog and then I do a controversial at the end of the month. The last controversial for February was on restorative justice or restorative practice in schools. So yeah, I'll stop rambling. Thank you so much for watching, guys. New video soon. Oh no, kids losing it. Oh, that's good. Oh, what's going on? I'm guessing diaper change. They are very resistant to diaper changes right now, which is so fun. They're really old enough to start potty training, but are very resistant to that as well. So what do you do?